Welcome back, everyone. In the last video, we started learning about leveraging the routes and the route component from React Router DOM. We're going to dive much deeper into routes especially because there's a lot that we can do with this and there's a lot more nuance that we're going to learn about. But I want to highlight one quick thing. The reason why these components are able to connect to the URL and therefore render the appropriate element is because of the fact that these are nested inside of the browser router. You remember that I mentioned that you want to nest your application inside of the browser router component or whichever router component you choose to use and leverage, most of the time it being browser router, because by doing this, you're extending that ability to read from the URL and keep track of navigation history and all those things and respond in turn with it because those components, the routes and the route component, rely on being wrapped in an outside browser router component. So our app component is really just the entry point, but all of those components that we leverage are now nested inside a browser router. So that's what I meant earlier in the previous lesson when I said you want to wrap your application inside a browser router so you can leverage the underlying browser functionalities when it comes to navigation. Now inside of the home route, I have switched the path back to just the slash, and we're going to dive a little deeper into understanding how this route component works. So you don't have to type this along because we're going to delete it anyways. This is really just to highlight a quick point. I'm going to make a really quick component, and it's just a component that renders an H1 that says, I am the shop page. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this route. And instead here, I'm going to say, when you land on -shop, render our shop component. So I'm going to save this. And now when we go back to our application, if we navigate to /shop, what do we see? We see that we've entirely removed the home component and now we're rendering the shop component. So everything here behaves as we expect. We know that when we pattern match, we want to strip out everything that we had before, but now we want to render in what's appropriate. But as I mentioned earlier, what we want to show is this consistent navigation bar. So how do we do this? Well, as it turns out, there's actually a few patterns that exist within React Router DOM and its components that allow us to do exactly that. So in order to understand that, we're going to have to modify our code a little bit. The first thing we're going to explore is this concept of nested routes. In order to nest routes within the other, what we do is instead of making these just one-line closed components, we essentially make them components where we can embed children between them. So here I'm going to take this shop route and I'm going to nest it inside of the home route. So instead of using the auto closing tag, I'm just going to open up this component and then nest the home route inside. What this now does is actually a couple things. The first of which is it makes the path that's nested inside relative to the path of the parent. So what this means is that you can imagine that for this route path to match now, it's going to have to match the parent first, so /, and then it's going to have to match the inside, which is shop. So I know this doesn't really seem any different from what we had before, because before our path was matching this anyways, but they're no longer siblings. This is a child. So what this means is that if this top level was /home, in order for this to match, it's got to be /home/shop. So let's just keep these paths so that we know what's happening here. So let's go back to our application. We notice that now we're no longer rendering on the empty plain URL. Instead, we now navigate to /home. We see our home component as we expect. What do you think is going to happen when we navigate to /shop? Let's see. Well, isn't that interesting? We still see our home component, but we don't see our shop page component. Why is that? Well, there's actually a couple things to notice. The first is that the parental component is still rendering despite the fact that we're now matching beyond /home/shop. And this is one important thing. This means that our parental component at that parent level route is going to render unless we tell it otherwise. So that's one important thing. And I'll explain how we do that after. But the other thing is that even though we have /shop matching, our route is not displaying its element. Why is that? The reason for that is because we have not actually told our code where we want this matching slash shop component to go? The way that we do that is we actually have to go into our parent level component, and we need to tell it exactly where we want React Router DOM to render this nested matching element. And the way you do that is you use another component that we get from React Router DOM called an outlet. This outlet you can see as a outlet where the code that we want to render should come out from. And we would use it inside of our component. Now, because as I mentioned, you always need one parent level component, I'm just going to make a new div, and inside I'm going to render the outlet. Wherever you render the outlet is where, when this route matches, is going to render the element. So shop here is going to render above the directory. So let's back to our code. And here we see that's exactly what happened. If I move this outlet below the directory, we see now it's below our directory. So that is very powerful because the outlet now allows us to leverage this pattern matching and this nesting structure in order to dynamically change portions of our code based on the routes and the nested routes. So with this in mind, we can kind of start to see a pattern emerge where we can keep the navigation bar, but just change the content inside using a specific nesting strategy. That's what we're going to do in our next lesson. I want you to think about it a little bit first, just so that you're familiar, because we learned something really interesting just now, and it might be a little confusing with these nested routes. But just really sit and think about it a little bit and imagine in your head how you can imagine this composition we're about to do in the next video is going to look so that we can maintain a navigation bar. So think about that and then join me in the next video and let's do that together.